Good afternoon. As you can imagine, when I started this research, I did not anticipate it would be this big of a subject in global affairs. So just to give you some background on my research, what started this out was a course I took in 2018 when I was an undergraduate here with Dr. Danny. And this was a course on terrorism that our university offers pretty regularly. And when I started looking into cases of terrorism globally, I saw that Syria stood out with about 1,700 incidents, and Ukraine for the same period of time with about 690 incidents. And to me, this really stuck out as saying, okay, what's going on here? We hear about Syria all the time. And for the metrics we're talking about, it's more around 2014, 2016, the time when ISIS was a very, very serious security concern for basically every nation on earth. So what I did was I investigated if there is terrorism happening in Ukraine, what kind of terrorism is it, and what should be the policy reactions to this. And I have three main findings here. And that is, first of all, when we talk about terrorism, we have to understand that terrorism is a very complex socio-political phenomenon in which there are many differing opinions of what terrorism is. The statement, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, is very apt here because it's very, very true. Both the Russian state today and the Ukrainian state today are employing rhetorics of terrorist narratives to target their political enemies, whether that's domestic or foreign. So I broke the terrorism that I identified down to three categories, and that is, first of all, terrorism which seems a little bit less than terrorist. And this is actions that you might see in a normal battlefield setting, such as the battle for Donetsk airport, which occurred between 2014 and 15, mainly in the wintertime, where the Russian-backed separatists won that specific battle. But it was characterized by the Ukrainian government as being under the purview of the anti-terror organization kind of military strategy. So right at the outset of the Ukrainian civil war, we see, or at least the annexation of Donbas and Crimea, we see a reach by U.S. allies and kind of Western policymakers to go for an anti-terrorism counter angle for this war, which I think is incredibly important in understanding the later events, which of course include the downing of the MH17 flight over Ukraine, which brings my second definition of terrorism, which is state-sanctioned terrorism. We have to be extremely concerned about what state actors are willing to do these days to achieve their goals. In my opinion, this is very reminiscent of Libya in the 80s, and we're dealing with a very similar situation there. And of course, lastly, is far-right terrorism attacks that we need to be concerned about in Ukraine that my research showed. And I want to focus on this for a moment because I actually think it's an underplayed and serious concern that many more Americans should be aware of, as the United States just introduced a large defense addition in our spending to Ukraine, understandably so. But the political situation in Ukraine is far more complex than I think any of us can really understand. And we need to recognize that just because there is obviously Russian aggression happening in the region, it doesn't mean that there are not poor domestic actors, and this is what we see in Ukraine, specifically in the form of either anti-ethnic Romani violence. There's other history of anti-Hungarian and anti-Polish attacks in Western Ukraine, and this is kind of an underrepresented area in the literature, especially in this region of the world. And it happens to now be one of the most important conversations we need to be having in terms of global security. So this is just my research that I've been conducting for about the past 2 years. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to accept it here from Booth, an institution I've always loved. So mad shout out to Dr. Muller and Dr. Danny, as well as everyone in the geography department that helped me out with this research. Thank you very much.